My name is Evelyn, and I'll never forget the night I fled my own home in the dead of night, shaking barefoot, clutching only my purse and a folder of papers pressed tight against my chest. The clock in the hallway had just struck midnight. I can still hear it now, 12 heavy chimes that seemed to echo through the house like a warning bell marking the hour my life would break in half. That night was too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your skin, making the hairs on your arms stand up. Our old family house, the one my husband inherited from his father, always creaked and sighed. But that night it seemed to be holding its breath along with me. I had woken from a shallow, restless sleep, heart racing, convinced that something was wrong. I padded down the stairs for a glass of water, but instead of silence, I caught the faintest murmur of a voice, a whisper that did not belong to me, nor to my husband. The kitchen door was half open, a strip of pale light cutting across the hallway. And there she was, my mother-in-law Marjorie. She was hunched close to the receiver of the landline phone, speaking in that syrupy tone she always used when she wanted something. Her voice was low, but her words slid through the door as if they were meant for me. Yes, she's fragile. It won't take much to convince him. By the time I'm done, she'll be gone from this house for good. My pulse thudded in my ears. The glass of water was forgotten. I froze where I stood, my breath shallow, my hand gripping the banister. She went on, voice dripping with certainty. All I need is one incident. Just one little push, and I'll have proof she's not fit to be here. He'll side with me, you know he always does. She'll have nowhere to run. It was as though the air turned to ice. I backed away slowly, silently, the way you do when you realize a snake is coiled inches from your foot. I retreated to the shadows of the hallway and pressed my back against the wall, my body trembling. That was the moment I knew I couldn't stay. But before I tell you about how I fled, you need to understand how I ended up in that house in the first place, because the truth is, nobody runs at midnight unless they've already been pushed to the edge long before. The house itself had always carried weight. It was one of those big two-story homes built in the 1940s with narrow staircases, too many rooms, and a smell of polished wood that clung no matter how many candles I burned. My husband Daniel had grown up here. Every corner carried his mother's hand, the lace curtains she refused to replace, the china cabinet stuffed with glass figurines, the stiff-backed furniture no one dared sit on. When his father passed away, Daniel insisted we move in to help his mother out. At first, I agreed. It made sense financially, we weren't exactly swimming in savings, and Marjorie had painted herself as a lonely widow. I thought maybe living under one roof could bring us closer as a family. I was naive. From the very first morning, Marjorie established the rules without ever saying them outright. She commented on the way I brewed coffee. "Daniel likes it stronger, dear." She corrected my folding of laundry. "That's not how we've always done it." She replaced my cooking spices with her own jars, neatly labeled and decades old. These weren't outright battles, just tiny cuts delivered daily, dressed in politeness. At the dinner table, she always found a way to circle the conversation back to herself and her son, as if I were an intruder in their shared story. If I suggested we try something new, a weekend trip, a change in decor, she'd smile thinly and remark, "That's not really Daniel's style, is it?" And Daniel, poor man, he'd just shrug and avoid eye contact, never willing to upset either of us. The worst was the way she filled the house with memories I didn't share. Photos of Daniel with his ex-girlfriend hung in the hallway until I finally insisted they come down. Even then, she kept the albums on the coffee table, sighing as she flipped through them in front of me. "She always knew just what he liked," she'd murmur. I wanted to scream, but instead I clenched my jaw and cleaned the dishes in silence. The house was hers. That's how she saw it. No matter that Daniel and I paid the utilities, no matter that I scrubbed the floors and cooked the meals. To her, I was the guest who had overstayed her welcome, the usurper who dared to build a life in her kingdom. And slowly, I began to unravel. I'd find myself double-checking doors, refolding towels, apologizing for things I hadn't done. My sleep grew restless. My confidence, once steady, eroded under the drip, drip, drip of her constant undermining. That night when I overheard her, it wasn't the first time I'd suspected she wanted me gone, but it was the first time I had proof. Hearing her plot to frame me as unstable, to separate me from Daniel, to take everything I had worked for, it was too much. I remember standing in the darkness of the stairwell, clutching the railing so hard my knuckles ached, whispering to myself, "She's really going to do it. She's going to destroy me." That's when the resolve hit me like a spark catching flame. If I stayed, I would lose everything. But if I left now, before she could strike, I might have a chance to reclaim my life. And so, with the clock still echoing its midnight chimes in my ears, I turned toward the bedroom to pack. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. It was time to flee. When you live under the same roof as someone who disdains you, the battles are rarely loud. They don't start with slammed doors or broken dishes. They start with whispers and sighs, with the kinds of remarks that slice so thin you almost doubt they've wounded you. Almost. Marjorie never raised her voice at me. She didn't have to. She was far too practiced in the art of disapproval to waste energy on shouting. Instead, she wielded her silences like sharpened knives, her pauses more powerful than any scolding. I came to dread those moments, her lips pressed tight, her eyes darting toward the ceiling as though speaking directly to heaven about the burden I placed upon her. The first morning after we moved in, I brewed a pot of coffee the way Daniel liked it, or so I thought. He had always taken it with cream and a spoonful of sugar when we lived in our small apartment. But when I poured him a cup in his mother's kitchen, Marjorie raised one carefully arched eyebrow. "Daniel prefers it stronger," she said, her voice casual but her eyes cutting into me. "Don't you, dear?" Daniel gave that half smile he always wore in her presence, the one that meant I don't want to argue. He took a sip, swallowed, and murmured, "It's fine, Mom." But the damage was done. I felt small, as though I'd failed some invisible test. That was the rhythm of our days. I'd fold the laundry, she'd refold it. I'd season dinner, she'd adjust it. She'd remind me of Daniel's favorite childhood meals, favorite shirts, favorite places, as though I could never measure up to the woman she believed truly knew her son. At first I told myself it was just the awkwardness of living together. We'd adjust. We were 3 adults learning to share a home again, but over time the little cuts bled into something deeper. One evening I set the table for dinner. I placed the plates, laid out silverware, folded napkins, just so. Daniel had worked late and I wanted to make the meal special. Roast chicken, rosemary potatoes, green beans with almonds. It was the kind of dinner that once made him beam with appreciation. Marjorie entered the dining room, her heels clicking softly against the floorboards. She glanced at the table, at the food steaming in the center. She gave a small sniff, then crossed the room to the cabinet. Without a word, she pulled out her own serving dish and began transferring the food piece by piece into her porcelain bowls. "These look better on the table," she explained, smoothing her apron. "Presentation matters, dear. Don't you agree?" I opened my mouth, closed it again. My chest burned. When Daniel walked in minutes later, he saw only the beautiful spread laid out in his mother's cherished china. He kissed me lightly on the cheek, distracted, never noticing the way my hands trembled as I passed the serving spoon. The nights were worse. I'd lie in bed with Daniel beside me, his breathing deep, and even while I stared into the darkness, replaying every interaction with his mother. I should have spoken up. I should have insisted he notice. I should have demanded he draw a line. But I didn't. Instead, I carried the weight alone. It chipped at me, her subtle undermining his silence. I began to question myself. Was I overreacting? Was I imagining the malice in her words? After all, to anyone else, she seemed perfectly polite. At church on Sundays, she introduced me with a bright smile. "This is my daughter-in-law, Evelyn. Isn't she just lovely? People saw warmth. They didn't see the squeeze of her hand on my shoulder, the pressure just a little too firm, the silent message. Remember your place. There were small humiliations too carefully orchestrated. At a potluck, she accidentally swapped the labels on my casserole, crediting it to another woman. At the grocery store, she corrected me loudly on the price of bread, shaking her head, as if I couldn't handle basic arithmetic. The cruelest moments came when she invoked Daniel's ex-girlfriend. The photographs had been bad enough: smiling faces, arms-linked eyes, sparkling with youth and promise. I'd removed them from the walls only to find them resurfacing in albums left open on the coffee table. One night, as we cleared dishes, Marjorie sighed. Daniel always did have a soft spot for tradition. That's why he stayed with Claire for so long. She knew how to make a home feel comfortable. Her eyes slid to me. It's not something you can fake, dear. I nearly dropped the plate in my hand. Daniel heard, of course. He was standing right there, but he said nothing. He simply stacked the silverware and walked away, leaving me choking on humiliation in my own kitchen. Looking back, those little battles seem almost harmless compared to what came later. But at the time, they wore me down like water dripping on stone. Each day, I lost a little more of myself. I second-guessed everything. Should I buy this soap or that one? Should I take Daniel's hand in front of her? Or would that earn another silent glare? I tried to win her approval. I cooked meals from Daniel's childhood, followed her cleaning routines, even accompanied her to church socials I dreaded. Nothing worked. The bar shifted endlessly. No matter how much I gave, it was never enough. Daniel noticed my exhaustion, though he pretended not to. He'd rub my shoulders at night, murmur that his mother means well. But his reassurances felt hollow, like wallpaper covering a crumbling wall. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have imagined, was that these small cuts were only the beginning. Beneath them, Marjorie was sharpening something larger, something far more dangerous. The pot shots, the sighs, the undermining, they were laying the groundwork for something else entirely. The night I overheard her on the phone, I realized she wasn't just dissatisfied. She was planning a full assault. But before that midnight revelation, I endured the quiet battles, the subtle cruelty. And perhaps that's what made her plan all the more devastating. She had softened me up, eroded me until my defenses were thin as paper. So when her whispered words sliced through the kitchen door, I felt them like daggers. Because after years of little cuts, my skin had already been worn raw. The hallway was dark, except for a strip of light spilling from the kitchen door. I had meant only to fetch a glass of water, but when I heard Marjorie's voice, low, syrupy, too careful, I froze. She sat at the little table by the window, back straight, the landline cord coiled like a snake in her hand. "Yes," she whispered. "Tuesday works. He'll be tired after work. Easier to push then." I pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding so loud I thought she'd hear. "No, she won't leave on her own," she continued. "She's stubborn. But I'll stage something, an incident Daniel can't ignore. Maybe the stove left on, maybe her pills found in the kitchen cabinet. Something to make her look unstable. For her own good, of course." My stomach turned. I gripped the banister until my knuckles ached. She wasn't just criticizing me anymore. She was planning to destroy me. "Yes, Dr. Ashby will document it," she said softly. "And Mr. Bennett is ready. Once we have the paperwork, she'll have to go. Daniel will side with me. He always does." The words chilled me more than the midnight air. I pictured the gas hissing from an unlit burner, Daniel walking in to discover it. Or a bottle of pills planted neatly where they didn't belong. Evidence manufactured and sharpened like a knife. "She doesn't have the stomach to fight," Marjorie added. "She'll be gone before she realizes what's happening." I slipped back into the shadow of the stairwell, every nerve in my body electric. Gone before I realized. No, I realized now. Upstairs, the floor creaked as she moved toward her bedroom. I waited until her door clicked shut, then crept to my room, whispering to myself, "If I stay, she wins. If I leave, I fight." I opened the closet, pulled down the canvas tote with my documents slid in the spare car key. My hands shook, but my resolve hardened. Tuesday was her deadline. Tonight would be mine. I set my alarm for 12:07 a.m. The odd number, a talisman against habit, then lay awake, waiting for it anyway. When it vibrated, I already had the quilt folded at my waist and one foot on the floor. The house was as dark as a held breath. Daniel murmured, turned his face to the window, and settled again. I watched him for a long heartbeat, memorizing the slope of his nose, the way his hair kinked at the temple when it needed a trim. I wanted to touch his shoulder to write a note to explain. But notes could be intercepted. Explanations twisted. Silence would be my shield for a few hours at least. I dressed in last summer's black leggings and a sweater that didn't rustle. Socks, then sneakers I'd left by the closet to avoid the squeak of the cedar floor. I tied my hair into a low knot and tucked the ends into my collar. Small, quiet, invisible, that was the assignment. The canvas tote waited by the door like a packed lung. I slid in a phone charger, a small notebook, a ballpoint pen. Wallet. A zippered pouch with 2 weeks of my medication and an orange bottle of ibuprofen. From the dresser, I took the little velvet box with my grandmother's ring, the one thing of value that belonged to me before marriage joined our accounts like 2 wires spliced with tape. The ring fit into my palm with a comforting gravity. I dropped it into the pouch and zipped. Keys. Spare car key in my pocket. The other on a ring with a brass grocery tag. I paused at Daniel's nightstand, lifted his key fob, and pressed it into his sock drawer so I wouldn't be tempted to take it. If Marjorie woke to an empty driveway, she'd start calling within minutes. My old sedan sat on the street, anonymous enough among the neighbors' cars that its absence might not register until morning. The hallway was a tunnel, long and familiar. I placed my feet on the runner's stitched edges, avoiding the third board that always sighed and the seventh that popped like a knuckle. In the guest room, the door stood ajar. The smell of lavender sachets slipped out like a memory. I moved faster past the framed needlepoint of the Serenity Prayer, Marjorie's favorite liturgy, and the portrait of Daniel at 10, grinning around 2 missing teeth. The house had collected our lives the way a shoreline collects shells. Lovely if you don't notice the sharp edges. Downstairs, the kitchen window was black glass. My reflection ghosted toward me, a woman I recognized and didn't. I opened the fridge and stood in its blue glow, letting the hum calm me. 2 bottles of water into the tote. A Tupperware of chicken salad and a plastic spoon. On impulse, I grabbed 3 apples and tucked them into a side pocket like talismans, bright and heavy. The back door had a temper if you lifted while you turned, the latch released with a soft kiss. I placed my hand under the knob, felt the cold brass against my wrist, and breathed in for 4. Hold for 4, out for 6. The lock turned. The door opened to a seam of night air sharp with dew and the peppery smell of boxwood. I stepped onto the stoop, closed the door, and lowered the key into the flower pot where we hid it from no one. I wouldn't need it where I was going. I wouldn't need it until I could come back on my own terms if I ever did. The yard held its own kind of quiet. Somewhere far off, a train offered a single long note. A fox skittered through the neighbor's hedge, his eyes catching a ping of starlight before he vanished. Above me, the maple tree clicked lightly like bones settling. When I reached the side gate, it stuck as always. I lifted the bottom slat and slid through sideways tote to my chest. I could feel my heartbeat against the canvas. On the sidewalk, I kept to the darker patches between street lamps. The world you know looks different at midnight, as if the blocks have shifted and the houses leaned in to listen to one another. We lived on a curve, our town's version of a good street, the kind realtors praised for its mature trees and its Christmas lights that didn't stop at New Year's, because no one wanted to be first to strip the cheer. My car, silver and modest, waited under a sycamore that shed its bark in parchment curls. I pressed the fob and the headlights blinked without beeping. I'd turned off the chirp years ago for mornings like this when I left for work before dawn. The door handle felt like a decision. I slid in, set the tote on the passenger seat, and lowered myself into the seat's memory. The upholstery held a faint trace of the lemon cleaner I used on Saturdays. A parking ticket stub had fused into the crease beside the emergency brake. I'd argue with City Hall about it another day. I turned the key. The engine caught, then settled into its familiar low purr. A light at the corner bedroom across the street blinked on. I froze, breath suspended. A silhouette crossed the window, paused, and continued. Bathroom. I exhaled. I shifted into drive. Every good escape story swears the protagonist didn't look back. I did. The house rose behind me, dark and square, a place I had scrubbed and painted and tried to love. In the second-floor window, the lace curtain moved with the breath of the central air. Somewhere inside, a woman slept, who was certain the world was an object she could arrange if she were patient and ruthless enough. Somewhere inside, a man slept who had been taught all his life that the absence of a fight meant peace. I turned the corner and the house was gone. The first mile is always the longest. The grocery store lot a wide black plain, the bank's drive-through lanes lit like empty ribs, the stoplight at Willow and Main cycling through red, yellow, green for no one at all. I drove under the bridge where someone had spray-painted "Be kind" in turquoise, the letters softened by fog. The radio stayed off. I needed the engine's steady whisper, the occasional thump of expansion joints. When I reached Route 17, I merged like a swimmer slipping into a cold lake and felt the night lift me. Plan. I said aloud, my voice awed in the car as if it belonged to a kind cousin who would not judge. Get somewhere safe. Sleep. In the morning call. The sentence ended in fog. My sister lived 3 states away and had her own life with 3 teenagers and the gentle chaos of a second marriage. Old friends had drifted when my world shrank to shared rooms and church socials chosen by someone else. The idea of going to a shelter flared and receded. I wasn't ready to be typed and filed. A motel then. Cheap, anonymous, with a lock that answered to me. At the edge of town, the gas station sat like a low-lit island. The pump card reader blinked, waiting, in green letters. I filled the tank, chest prickling with the sense of being watched, though no one stood within 20 yards. Inside, the clerk perched on a stool, chin in palm, a kid with a tattoo that looked like an anchor drawn in ballpoint. I bought coffee that tasted like pennies and a bag of almonds. He didn't look up. Back on 17, the miles fell like beads. Fields. Then a cluster of warehouses. Then the long skein of darkness you only see far from cities. The sky a dark lake with pinholes where something brighter pressed through. I thought about Tuesday, about the phrase "for her own good," about the way a kindly word can become a blade. I thought about the copy of our marriage license in my tote and the handful of cash I'd kept from cash sales at the craft fair. Last fall, my secret stash of $20 bills, crisp and guilty. I thought about Marjorie's voice saying an incident with the same detachment she might apply to a burned roast. I did not cry. It surprised me, the dry eyes, the steady hands. Fear had burned clean and left something like focus. Every time the road rose and fell, the tote strap slid, and I adjusted it, a small, repeated reassurance. You have what you need for tonight. The sign for a motor inn appeared as if someone flipped a card in front of me. Blue Birch Lodge vacancy, weekly rates. The arrow pulsed a lazy red. The office was a glass box with a ficus tree drooping in one corner and a bell on the counter. I pulled into a space under a light and cut the engine. The silence that followed was not the house's tense hush. It was the quiet of a place that expected nothing from me. Inside, a woman in her 50s with a braid as thick as rope looked up from a crossword. You look like you found the night and didn't much care for it, she said, voice matter of fact, not unkind. I need a room, I answered. Just for a few nights. ID and a card. She slid a registration slip toward me, then hesitated. We've got ground floor near the ice machine or upstairs at the end. If you want quiet, take upstairs. Lot of foot traffic by the ice. Upstairs, I said. My pen hovered over the line for vehicle make and plate. I wrote silver sedan and left the rest blank. She handed me a brass key fob stamped 214. Waffles in the lobby, 6 to 9, she said. If you want 'em, coffee's always on. In the room, the bedspread was printed with blue leaves, and the art above the headboard showed a lake that could have been anywhere. I slid the deadbolt, then the chain, then set the tote on the desk and stood there listening to the tinny burble of someone's TV 2 doors down. I opened the drawer with the Bible and found a phone book thin as a magazine, a relic of a world that still believed neighbors knew one another's addresses by heart. I sat on the bedshoes still on and finally let my lungs empty. My phone buzzed a message from Daniel You Up. I stared at the screen, my thumb a small boat in big water. I turned the phone face down. Not yet. I ate 3 almonds and an apple I didn't taste. I plugged in the charger and watched the phone's battery icon grow from a red sliver to one clean bar. In the bathroom, the light was too bright, and the mirror too honest. I splashed water on my face, then wiped it away with a towel that smelled faintly of bleach and summer. Back on the edge of the bed, I pulled the notebook from the tote and wrote a list headed to do. It steadied me, the shape of letters on paper, the way a plan makes a future. Tomorrow, call a lawyer, not hers. Call the bank. Call, maybe Pastor Elaine. She'd kept her eyes kind when Marjorie's smile got too shiny. Find a place for a week. Buy a prepaid SIM. Save every receipt. Sleep. I clicked off the lamp. The room darkened to a deep blue. Somewhere, a semi downshifted and the sound came soft and long like a whale singing. I lay on top of the cover's shoes still laced in case I needed to run again, and counted the beats of my heart until the numbers became something like a lullaby. I had left. I was gone before Tuesday, and for the first time in months the quiet around me felt like mine. The motel room felt like a waiting room for the rest of my life. Everything inside was generic. The curtains patterned with muted swirls, the carpet a forgettable shade of tan, the comforter tucked so tightly that climbing under it felt like a battle. But the locks were mine. The deadbolt clicked, the chain slid into place, and for the first time in months I controlled a door. I dropped onto the bedclothes still clinging to me from the night air and let the silence wrap around me. No footsteps overhead. No hum of Marjorie's humidifier, no faint scent of her powder creeping under the door. Just the faint tick of the air conditioner cycling on and the occasional car on the highway. That silence was my first ally. The next ally came in the shape of paper. I pulled the tote close and began emptying it on the desk passport, social security cards, the deed to my car, marriage license, tax returns. Each document was a brick in the house of my life, proof I wasn't just a figment of someone else's story. I stacked them neatly, my hands steady at last, and whispered to myself, "These are mine. No one can erase me while I hold these." I wrote in the notebook, secure bank account. Lawyer not hers. Call work, explain absence. Safe place week by week if needed. Evidence collect. The word evidence pulsed in my mind like a neon sign. Marjorie had her logs, her little collection of incidents. But I had memories, times she intervened, twisted set traps. If I could trace those, maybe I could prove intent. I didn't know how yet, but I knew it started here in this anonymous room with its humming fridge and its dim lamp. Sleep came late and shallow. I woke to sunlight cutting between the curtains and the muffled sound of someone dragging a suitcase past my door. My phone buzzed, 3 missed calls from Daniel, 1 text. "Where are you?" Mom's worried. Worried. The word hit like a slap. She'd been the architect of my flight, and yet she framed herself as the victim left behind. I didn't answer. Instead, I picked up the motel phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. The voice that answered was warm, husky with age, but unmistakable. "Evelyn, good Lord, is that you?" "Hi, Pastor Elaine," I whispered, pressing a hand over my eyes. I need I need some advice. And I need you to believe me. Her silence lasted only a breath before she said, I believe you already. Where are you? We met at a diner by the highway, one of those places that smelled of bacon and burned coffee no matter the hour. She slid into the booth across from me, her hair pulled back. Her glasses smudged at the edge. She reached for my hands without ceremony. You look like you haven't slept in a month, she said gently. It's been longer than that, I admitted. I told her everything, the whispers, the undermining, the overheard call. I even confessed my doubts the moments I thought maybe I was losing grip. She listened without flinching, her thumbs rubbing slow circles on the backs of my hands. When I finished, she let out a long breath. You're not crazy, she said firmly. You're in danger. Emotional, maybe legal. But danger all the same. And you were right to leave. The tears came then, hot and unexpected, slipping down my face and splashing into the untouched coffee between us. Elaine introduced me to the next ally, her cousin Miriam, a lawyer who did pro bono work for women in difficult situations. Miriam had a firm handshake and sharp eyes that missed nothing. When I slid the documents across her desk that afternoon, she nodded with quiet approval. You did the smart thing gathering these, she said. Paper is power, don't forget that. She asked questions in precise order: joint accounts, property titles, health insurance, employment. I answered, embarrassed at how little I'd kept in my name. Marjorie had convinced Daniel to consolidate everything for simplicity. I had no credit card of my own, no savings tucked aside beyond the few $100s hidden in my tote. That's okay, Miriam said briskly. We start from where we are. First step is to secure your identity. Separate account, new mailing address, phone plan in your own name. We'll make a paper trail that belongs to you. I exhaled, shaky but grateful. For the first time, the word we included someone willing to stand with me. That night, back in the motel, I ate almonds and chicken salad and replayed the day. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt like space, room to think. Marjorie's voice still echoed in my head. She won't leave on her own, but I had left. I had rewritten that prophecy. Still, fear lingered. I thought of Daniel, of the bewildered messages piling on my phone. Was he complicit or simply blind? Could he be an ally, or would love for his mother always outweigh love for me? The questions knotted in my chest, but I tucked them away. One battle at a time. I wrote in the notebook again. Pastor Elaine believes me. Miriam can help. Paper is power. Silence is not weakness. Then I closed the book, turned off the light, and whispered into the dark, I am not alone anymore. Miriam's office smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books, the kind of place where even the dust seemed to have order. I sat across from her at the wide oak desk, the tote of documents between us like a lifeline. She leafed through the papers with steady hands, each turn of the page crisp and deliberate. Her glasses caught the light, hiding her eyes, but her voice was sharp as she spoke. You understand what she's doing, don't you? Miriam asked. I nodded, though the words still tasted bitter. She's trying to erase me, to make me look unstable so she can remove me. Legally. Or at least pressure Daniel until I leave with nothing. Miriam tapped the marriage license with her pen. She can't erase you entirely. You're his wife. And that means something. But if she controls the narrative, she could ruin your reputation, sway Daniel, and make sure you leave with less than you deserve. That's why you need a counterplan. And you need it now. That word, counterplan, stuck in my chest like a seed. For weeks, maybe months, I had been reacting, defending, shrinking under Marjorie's blows. Now at last, I had a chance to act. We built the plan piece by piece. Step 1, secure finances. Miriam urged me to open a bank account in my own name. Cash is fine for emergencies, she said, but you need a record. A paper trail that shows independence. If she paints you as unstable, the court will want proof of responsibility. Money is responsibility. I drove to a credit union 2 towns over, the kind where the tellers still wore name tags with their first names etched in plastic. My hands shook as I signed the forms, but when they handed me a temporary debit card with my name embossed across the front, I nearly cried. It was a small rectangle of plastic, but it felt like armor. Step 2. Collect evidence. Miriam asked me to write down everything, dates, times, incidents, no matter how small. She has her logs, then you'll have yours. We'll show the pattern and we'll show intent. At night in the motel, I filled page after page of the notebook. The time she forgot to give me my prescription until I was shaking with withdrawal. The Sunday she told the pastor's wife I wasn't feeling up to attending, though I'd been dressed and waiting by the door. The way she'd slipped Daniel's ex-girlfriend into conversation, seeding doubt. Each memory stung as I wrote it, but seeing them stacked in ink gave me strength. Step 3. Allies. Elaine promised to testify to Marjorie's manipulations if it came to that. Miriam reminded me of others who might be quietly watching: neighbors who'd seen me tend the yard alone, co-workers who'd heard me decline shifts because something at home always came up. Isolation is her weapon, Miriam said. Connection is yours. But the hardest step was the one that involved Daniel. You need to give him a choice, Miriam said firmly. Not an ultimatum, a choice. Show him the evidence calmly without hysteria. Ask where he stands. If he stands with you, he needs to prove it with action, not just words. The thought terrified me. Daniel was my husband, my partner, or he was supposed to be. But in Marjorie's house, he'd been more son than spouse, more mediator than ally. Could he really see through her charm? Could he choose me? That night, I lay in the motel bed staring at the ceiling, imagining the confrontation. His mother's words whispered in my memory. He always sides with me. Was she right? Still, Miriam was right too. Without Daniel's choice, I was fighting half a war. The plan gave me shape, but it was more than tactics, it was a change inside me. For so long, I'd been reacting to her moves, shrinking, apologizing. Now I was the one with lists, with proof, with allies. Each small action: signing at the bank, writing an incident in the notebook, calling Elaine, was a brick in the wall between myself and the trap Marjorie had set. I began to notice other details too. How the motel clerk's casual smile in the morning felt like validation. How paying for my own coffee with my new card steadied my hand. How the quiet of the room didn't suffocate anymore. It expanded like air, filling lungs long starved. On Tuesday, the day she had planned for my downfall, I woke before dawn. The irony wasn't lost on me. Somewhere in that house, she was rising with confidence, ready to nudge me into an incident. But I wasn't there. I was in a motel with locks of my own. My papers safe in my tote, my plan unfolding like a map. Unfolding. I thought of her words: she won't fight. She doesn't have the stomach for it. I smiled for the first time in weeks, a real smile, though no one was there to see it. Because she was wrong. I was fighting already. The next step was the boldest: choosing the stage. Miriam suggested something public, undeniable. A family gathering, a church fundraiser, a community event where masks were harder to maintain. If she's weaving lies in private, she said, bring truth into the light. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. The thought thrilled and terrified me. Confronting her publicly risked humiliation, but it also promised clarity. No whispers, no secrets, just truth. And truth, I was learning, was my sharpest weapon. That night, I wrote one more sentence in my notebook. I am not just leaving anymore. I am returning with my own plan. And with that, the tide inside me shifted. Fear had been my companion for too long. Now resolve took its place. The church hall buzzed with the hum of folding chairs, coffee urns, and chatter that carried just under the ceiling fans. It was the kind of room where people celebrated potlucks and mourned funerals, ordinary American communal. Which is exactly why I chose it. Pastor Elaine called my name. My knees shook, but the tote strap across my chest steadied me. Inside it were my weapons, the copied address book, my written timeline, proof of a plan meant to erase me. I stood at the mic, every eye turning. Marjorie, pearls gleaming, folded her hands like a saint in stained glass. Daniel sat near the front, nervous, searching my face. "My name is Evelyn," I said, voice carrying further than I expected. "And last week I left my home at midnight. I left because I overheard my mother-in-law plotting with a lawyer and a doctor to push me out of my marriage, out of my house, and to brand me unstable. She called it for my own good. She even picked a date, Tuesday." A gasp rippled through the room. Marjorie shot up, chair scraping the floor. "Lies." She snapped, her face tight but her smile still plastered on. "She's confused. This is private family business." I turned to her, voice steady but burning. "You've been plotting for months, whispering to doctors, lawyers, anyone who'd help you, frame me as unfit. You called it an incident. Maybe my pills mysteriously misplaced, maybe the stove left on for Daniel to find. You were ready to risk my safety just to rewrite my story." Murmurs swelled. People shifted in their chairs. "Daniel," Marjorie said sharply, ignoring me. "Tell her to sit down. Tell them she's making this up." Every head turned to him. He swallowed, shoulders tight, the way I'd seen 100 times when he was torn between peace and truth. But this time, he lifted his chin. "Mom," he said into the mic, his voice low but firm, "sit down." The room fell into stunned silence. He looked at me, then at everyone else. I didn't want to see it. But I can't deny it anymore. My wife is not unstable. She is not disposable. And if you've been helping anyone plan otherwise, you've betrayed us both. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then rolling louder, certain. Neighbors I barely knew pressed my hand as they passed, whispering, "We've got your back." Mrs. Hart slipped me a folded note, "I've seen her games. Call me if you need a witness." Marjorie's face blazed red. She clutched her pearls, but they no longer gleamed. She grabbed her purse and hissed, "You'll regret this." Then she stormed out, her heels snapping like gunshots across the floor. I stood straighter, breath rushing in like air after drowning. I looked at the space she'd left behind and said, clear enough for the room to hear, "This is my story now. And I'm writing the ending." That night in the parking lot, Daniel and I stood between his truck and my silver sedan. The mist hung low, street lamps casting pale halos on the asphalt. "I can't go back there," I said. "Not until it's our house, not hers." He nodded. "Then we won't. We'll set boundaries. If she can't respect them, she won't be part of our life. I'll back you legally, emotionally, all of it. We'll even file if we have to. This is a no-fault divorce state. If she tries to tear us apart, the law won't hand her the victory." It was the first time he had spoken of law, of choice of us, without looking to her shadow. For once, the night felt like open space instead of a trap. I slid into my car, the tote safe on the passenger seat, and whispered to myself, "I am not running anymore. I am walking forward." If you're listening and your house feels like a cage, remember this: you are not a ghost in someone else's picture. You have rights. You have allies. You have a voice. Speak it. Write it. Share it. And if this story lit even a small spark in you, don't keep it quiet. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want to keep walking with me. I want to know how far this story has reached. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. We've got so many more powerful stories to share with you every single day. So please hit that subscribe button to never miss a moment like this one. Let's keep walking this journey together.